to go on from there, and we're going to talk about quite a big subject, the subject of emotion. And in preparing for this lecture, I thought really long and hard, because there's a lot of places that we can look to find the meaning of emotion and theories about emotion. And then as I was sitting there and I was reading through my notes and reading through my books and trying to work out how we'll piece the puzzle of emotion together, I started to remember one of the first things I learned at college, one of the first theories I learned, and it was probably the one that had the most profound impact on not just my counselling career, but my life in general. It started to get me to think about the relationships that I was in and how I dealt with people and how I reacted in certain situations in a completely different way to the way that I had before. Whereas previously, a lot of us, you know, myself included, would have taken our emotions and our reactions for granted as, well, when this happens, I feel angry and that's just the way it is. What we're going to talk about tonight starts to actually question that, and starts to question where that idea comes from and how it is that we get to a point where we think the way that we do, or we feel in a situation the way that we do. So we're going to talk tonight about attachment and what's called attachment theory more formally. And although it's a theory, I think as we talk through this, you'll find that there's a lot of evidence to support it. It's quite a biblical Christian theory. And I think you'll find that it will relate to a lot of situations that possibly in your own lives and a lot of other situations in other people's lives. But before we can understand emotions and before we can fully comprehend what they are, we need to understand how emotional development occurs, how a person grows emotionally. And just like a person experiences physical development, you know, you see a baby and then you see a 1-year-old and then you see a 2-year-old, and you can see the physical development of a person also experiences emotional development, where they go from being, again, a baby or a child who expresses pain or hunger and in the form of emotion or cries or tears, to a stage in one's life where they get to a point where tears and crying can mean something very, very different to hunger and pain or discomfort. They can mean sadness, grief, loss, pain. They can mean a whole multitude of things that might be going on in their life. So one theory about emotional development is based on the theory of attachment. And this attachment theory really looks at how a child bonds with what's called their primary caregiver, and in most cases, that's their mother, in the first few years of their life. And it talks about how in probably the first year that's the most critical bond time between a mother and a child, and how that it's still critical for the first 5 years, and that becomes the foundation of our life and how we learn to relate. And so what usually happens is our ideas about right and wrong and fair and unfair tend to originate from our parents, primarily from our primary caregiver, so the person who looked after us most from birth, and generally that tends to be the mother. It's not just a theory that is in psychology textbooks. It's also quite a biblical idea. If we look at the number of times in the Bible God refers to himself as our father or our parent and us as his children, I think it will demonstrate to us the importance and the value God places on parenthood. You know, some things he says are, as a mother comforts her child, so I will comfort you. You know, that need for comfort and that need for the child to have their needs met is stressed. And yet, O Lord, you are our Father is another one. And even when he taught us to pray, he taught us to say, our Father who art in heaven. And I think probably the most powerful one, or one of the most powerful ones, is where he says, can a mother forget her baby, or a woman the child within her womb? He's saying that bond is so intense and so strong, and he compares his love for us to that bond. And another one, he says, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. You know, that nurturing relationship, that relationship of love and comfort. And again, another one, he says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. "It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them in my arms." That's God speaking about his children. We know that that bond between parent and child is crucial from the time of birth, and we don't need anyone to tell us that. I think the implications of what that bond looks like in our life are probably things that we may or may not have been aware of. There were certainly things that I thought about for the first time when looking at this. And it's believed that the relationship between a child and a parent and how the parent reacts to the child's needs lays the foundation for how a person responds, feels, and ultimately the kind of loving relationship they will enter into in adult life. So it's not just that how a parent responds to a child in early stages of life that affects their childhood. It's thought that how a parent responds to a child in their childhood then affects how that child enters into adult relationships. And I know this might sound a little confusing now, but when we go through each and every one of each of the 4 attachment styles, I think it will start to make a bit more sense. And it's whether or not that child was filled with a sense of worth and value that determines how they will respond to the world around them. So if a child was filled with a sense of worth and value and was told that they could accomplish anything, that they had greatness in them, that they were wonderful, that they were excellent, if they were praised, if they were affirmed in their person, then they grow up with a positive sense of self. They grow up believing what they've been told, that they are able to accomplish things, that that God really does love them unconditionally. Whatever it is that we were told as children, generally we tend to believe. And so obviously, if they're the things that we believe, then we can then have a positive outlook when negative things come our way. And the reverse is true. Where a child is told that they're hopeless, that they're a failure, that they'll never understand anything, that they'll never amount to anything negative happening in their life affirms that, and then adds to the pain that they would already be feeling because they've been told those things. So from there, we need to look at, I guess, the 4 different types or the 4 different styles of attachment. And we'll start with the most positive one, which is a securely attached person. And a securely attached person is believed to have a primary caregiver as a child who was sensitive to their needs, provided emotional comfort when needed, showed affection, validated their feelings, and was available to them, but also set limits to behaviour according to their age and abilities. So we're not talking here about a theory that talks about that you just love children unconditionally, you let them run wild and you teach them no limits and no boundaries. No, this is a theory that talks about secure parenting style is one that affirms and praises but sets healthy boundaries. And as a result of living that way, such a person then believes that he or she is both worthy to receive and to give love to others, and that others are willing and capable of offering that person love. Because my parents loved me, because my parents affirmed me, because my parents told me that I am worthwhile, I am then able to be open to the idea that I can enter into relationships with other people where that's also the case. Whereas if my parents were unable to do that, then how can I possibly believe that my husband will love me? Or how can I possibly believe that my friends really care about me? And so my sense of how the world perceives me and how the world sees me and how the world treats me has a lot to do with how my parents treated me as children. And then having a positive view of themselves and others impacts every aspect of a secure person's relationships. He or she has increased motivation to be involved in long-term relationships, is able and ready to search for intimacy, is likely to be open and honest about personal information with the partner, is optimistic about the future, and is better able to solve problems, is more likely to have a sense of trust, not just towards their partner, but also towards other people. Because I was able to trust my primary caregiver, because that person nurtured me and cared for me and provided the emotional support that I needed at that stage, I grow up with this underlying foundation that the same is true for everyone else. And they also realize that others are safe to be with. So it's okay for me to be open and to show emotion to other people because it will be accepted with empathy, it will be accepted with care. So where a parent for example, has a child who, let's say, and I'm going to use examples, and I don't just mean this as a one-off case, but I mean this as if it was, repeated over many years, where a child, for example, cries because they're upset about something, and every time that the child cries, they're reprimanded, or they're punished, or they're sent to their room, and the time is never taken for the parent to show empathy to the child and try to understand why it is that the child is crying. Now, I'm not talking about a 2-year-old who's having a tantrum in a shopping centre, right? Because this is about setting boundaries and limits. I'm talking about in day-to-day life. What that person then grows up feeling is, well, I'm not allowed to show pain. I'm not allowed to show my tears. I'm not allowed to cry. And you find this, and very common amongst men, because men, especially in our culture, as young boys, are told not to cry. You're not allowed to cry. Crying is for girls. That's a bad thing, and they'd probably be punished for it. So later in life, when they enter into relationships with women who are quite emotional, and women are saying, what's wrong? Please talk to me about the reason that you're upset. Why are you feeling this way? They don't want to talk about it because from a very young age, it's been said to them that you're not to show negative emotion. So it stays with them. And then that responsiveness and the care of the child's primary caregiver allows the child then to develop into an adult who has healthy relationships. If that child, rather than being reprimanded for crying, was shown empathy, for example, and where the parent was able to go down to their level and work out what it is that they're upset about and teach them different ways or healthy ways of showing their emotion, then they will carry that into later life. So that is perfect world, secure attachment. And let me just say, these are all pure examples, right? So there's no perfect parent except one. We're never perfect parents. So we fall along somewhere in the scale of all of these. There's no person that's completely and totally secure. And although I've met a lot of people, I don't know if we can go to the other end and say that there's a person that's completely and totally disorganized, which we'll get into. But we all fall somewhere in that scale. So I'm saying those who are more towards the secure end tend to have relationships of this nature and tend to react to the world in this way. So that's secure persons. The next category is a person who's categorized as having what's called an avoidant or insecure attachment style is likely to have had a primary caregiver who was insensitive to him or her as a child in one or more ways. Primary caregivers of avoidant children cared for the child in a structured way rather than a responsive way, showed less affection, were dismissive of the child's emotions, were intrusive and ridiculed, mocked, were angered by, or ignored the child's cries for help. And the extent to which a caregiver treated the child in any of these ways affected the development of that child's ability to have healthy relationships in adult life. So what that's saying is, in an avoidant personality or in an avoidant attachment style. And let me just add a note here that these two attachment styles that we're talking about, this one and the one to come, are not the result of abuse. These are the result of parents who didn't know better. This is the best that they did with the knowledge that they had. But in a situation where a person had a parent or a primary caregiver or a mother in particular who disregarded the child's emotions and constantly met emotion with negativity or criticism, or who had a very structured, way of life, that things, all the I's had to be dotted, all the T's had to be crossed and nothing else mattered, where life was very regimented, that child then grows up not really knowing how to show emotion and almost running away from emotion as a negative thing because emotion to that child was punished. So as an adult, they think emotions must be a negative thing. I have to try to avoid them at all costs. So they put a pause. They wear masks. They don't show any emotions and tend to enter into relationships with people in that same avoidant, distant kind of stance. The extent to which a caregiver treated the child in any of these ways affected the development of that child's ability to have healthy relationships with others, as it directly affected their view of themselves and other people. Avoidant adults in times of trouble would take distance from partners and be reluctant to form interdependent relationships. they would also have a desire to be in control within relationships, as this stems from the belief that they're more capable than others. Because these children grow up with the mentality, if you do the right thing, you're a good person. If you do the right thing, then that's what matters. If you remain in control of your emotions and in control of the situation, that is what deems you to be a good person. So they grow up and they constantly want to be in relationships where they are in control, running the show, doing the right thing, but not really being able to engage at an emotional level, because that was always reprimanded as a child. The next one we want to look at is an ambivalent attachment style, and it's thought to have come about as a result of a relationship with a primary caregiver who discouraged independence in their child. The primary caregiver is likely to have been overprotective, unable to deal with conflict themselves, tended to ignore the child, withhold approval or affection, and often displayed disapproval of the child's attempts of independence. A child being raised in such a way often grows up to have a fear of abandonment, which can result in clinging behaviours within relationship, a need to please others, and a belief that he or she needs a protector. So where a person has had parents that are constantly overprotecting them, you know, the classic case of not letting a child, you know, jump in case they fall and they break their legs. You know, I'm talking jumping on the floor, I'm not talking jumping off a skyscraper, right? You know, I'm talking simple day-to-day children activities where parents really are overprotective and really inhibit their child from developing to their potential, have this fear about their child being hurt, and inadvertently the child inherits that and then grows up as an adult who walks around in fear, walks around unable to trust others, and often feeling like others are not approving of them because their parents didn't approve of them, and has this constant fear that people maybe don't really love me. You know, maybe they're going to leave. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not meant to be here. Maybe, you know, they're just looking at me and think that I shouldn't be the person talking here. It should be someone else. There's this constant self-criticism that's going on because they face that for a very large part of their life. And that need for a protector then affect the ambivalent person's ability to develop healthy relationships, since they live in an underlying belief that they're not worthy of love, and therefore often doubt if their partners really love them or if he or she will abandon them. So where a person with an avoidant personality believes that I'm the only person who can do it, I need to do it right, and I've learnt from a very young age how to do it right. An ambivalent personality or an ambivalent attachment, person with an ambivalent attachment style is one who thinks that I really can't do anything properly. I need someone to do everything for me. I'm an emotional mess, and they can tend to be over-emotional. They can then have exaggerated emotional reactions in the smallest of situations because they panic, because they've been so shielded and they don't know how to react. And they've been given this underlying message in this way of being raised that you really don't know how to do anything yourself. You need someone else to do it for you. And so when they come to a situation where they need to do something themselves, it's all panic. Persons with disorganized attachment tend to change rapidly and have trouble learning from past experience, because past experience doesn't mean anything to them. Because in the past, I tried to do the right thing and I got abused anyway, so I'm not going to do that again. At least doing the wrong thing is fun. I'm going to get abused either way, so I might as well just do what I want and get abused rather than do what I don't want, what's uncomfortable, and get abused. And so they're unable to predict or evaluate future consequences and have difficulty handling emotions. They usually have a low self-esteem as well as many other personality problems. Having such issues makes it extremely difficult for a person with a disorganized attachment style to have any relationship which is healthy and long-lasting. The abusive attachments formed in childhood years often destroy the ability of the child to develop into an emotionally healthy, rational person, capable of contributing in relationships. Because I was so confused as a child, because as a child I was given so many mixed signals, because I didn't know whether to turn left or to turn right, that as an adult I'm still confused and I don't know whether to trust this person or to love them or to hate them, because I loved my parents and that's kind of where it ended up. And so a person with this attachment style always has this internal turmoil going on. And I'm sure that if you sat down, those of you who serve in Sunday school, and thought about those children that act out, even though you might be loving and you might be caring and you might be sweet and you might try the very best that you can to include them, but it's like they're working extremely hard to be excluded and they're working extremely hard to rebel, then maybe there's a little light that needs to go on. Just the question of, well, is this child being abused? Because they don't know the difference. It seems, at least, that they don't know the difference between right and wrong. They don't believe that they will be affirmed or praised by behaving in a particular way or trusting others, for example. Secure attachment is the first one, and it says, as an adult, they can talk about their life in a way which is coherent and not disjointed by way of getting stuck on emotional bad times or gloss over such times as if they don't matter. The narrative given is one which is connected and flows relatively evenly over past events. Generally, the secure person perceives the self positively and thus a happy life, even given some bad times. And most importantly, will look upon and will approach others positively as if they are like the self. So what that's saying is, for a secure person, that life is generally okay. You remember the example I gave you I think it was in the first week, where I said to you, you can have two people in a neonatal intensive care unit with premature children. One can be really positive and, saying, wow, this is such a blessing, that's great, my baby is breathing and they're healthy and they're happy. And the mum next door might be saying, this is the worst thing that could possibly ever happen. How could God do this to me? What a terrible disaster. How am I going to cope? This is just not fair. Life is terrible. Two very different perspectives on the very same event. And sometimes that has a lot to do with how these people attached as children, and that sense of that I'm okay and I'm capable of achieving things, and I perceive myself to be positive and I perceive others around me to be positive, allows the person to then see negative things that come into their life as things that they can deal with. So their emotions, which we'll get into more, tend to be in line, in parallel to, or appropriate to the situation at hand. So they will still experience grief and loss and pain and sadness and heartache and all those things, but it will be at a level that is appropriate for the situation. And it says it here clearly, and it says the two attachment styles shown below, which is what I was saying earlier, indicate insecurity. They are the effects of poor parenting rather than maltreatment, although people at a high-end level will likely have suffered significant emotional harmful parenting. So what that's saying is, okay, we're talking about the extremes here, but most people that fall within these two brackets are people who've just been parented to the best that their parents knew. And the first one is avoidant, and it kind of, I think the images explain a bit better what I was trying to say earlier, in that in the avoidant personality, I see myself as positive. I can do things where other people don't really know what they're doing, and I kind of have to do their work for them. And as an adult, an avoidant attachment person, or a person with an avoidant attachment style, will talk about their life readily enough, just as long as the bad bits are not examined in any detail. Let's not get into the bad stuff. Let's not really talk about the emotional stuff, because that's difficult for them to do. The tendency is to skate over, to just skim over emotional pain, because it's really difficult for them to talk about it, because they were never taught how to deal with those emotions at a young age. And even though the self is projected as positive and they see themselves as a positive person, but this is more of a protective wall to protect them. And it's designed to keep others away from their sense of insecurity. Because that way, as long as I appear like I'm okay and I'm capable and I'm in control, then no one can really know the question marks I have within me. No one can really know how insecure I am. Remember, these are insecure attachment styles. No one can really know that I don't really believe that others love me, that I don't really believe that I'm capable of receiving love. As long as I keep up this wall, as long as I keep up this facade of being really professional and really, uptight, then no one's going to get in. And I can deal with people on that level. And because of that, they can appear distant, and people will talk about, you'll see these personalities and you say, oh, they're not the touchy-feely type, you know. They're not the ones to talk about emotion. They're not the ones to have a deep and meaningful will because they're not going to go there. And some people actually in this category in particular achieve excellent economic success because that personality fits in the corporate world. You know, that distant, tough, can-do-it attitude of getting things done in a corporate environment tends to succeed and tends to do extremely well. But at emotional level, they don't tend to do so well. And then the next one, the ambivalent attachment style, is the complete opposite of that. And it's as an adult, they'll talk too easily and too rapidly, but they get very emotional and get stuck in the bad stuff. So once something happens in their life that's really negative, they'll talk about it and talk about it and talk about it and talk about it for 10 years to come. And no matter how many positive things happen in that person's life, it's the way that she spoke to me that day just counts for everything. My relationship, my 10-year relationship with her doesn't make any difference. It's that day that makes it. And they get stuck on the things that have happened, that have done them harm, that have caused them pain. So they can then have exaggerated and heightened emotional reactions to things. And they tend to show anger or distress and show quite high levels of dependency. They tend to view the self negatively but others positively, and often have many relationships, but the grass is always greener on the other side. Everyone else is having a happier life than I am. I'm just miserable. I'm just not happy, and I can't be happy, and I'm just not good enough to be happy, is the underlying belief. And like I was saying, this is a continuum, right? People fall anywhere along these things. And finally, the disorganized attachment style is where a person sees themselves as incapable of being in relationships and incapable of anything positive, and also views others of being incapable of showing them affection or being caring or loving towards them. So it's a double negative. There's no positives in this one. The child doesn't know what to do. It has no model of the world and thus cannot predict itself nor others. It has a negative self-perception and a negative perception of others. The child doesn't trust, cannot trust, as at every turn is suffered degeneration of one sort or another. Such children can fluctuate wildly between extremes of avoidance or ambivalence, or be at a very high end avoidance or ambivalence. A few such children are so damaged that they cannot attach at all. So there are people who get so abused and have such confusion in their life that they can never then form any attachment. And this idea of attachments comes in really important when we start to talk about Christian counselling. And if we're going to start to talk about how it is that any person with an insecure attachment style can have healthy attachments in their life, as a Christian counsellor, it goes back to the basics of, well, they need to have a secure attachment first to a perfect, secure parent.